Again, for anyone who just joined, I'm Evan from the BuzzSumo team. Really, really excited. We're lucky enough to be joined here by Antony Cousins. Antony is the executive director for AI strategy at Cision. And he's somebody who's been the nexus of PR, communications, and tech for the past 20 years. And what's really cool about his experience is it's pretty broad and varied, but that involves both the private sector and the public sector. So for over 10 years, Antony worked with the UK government and communications roles across the world. In the past decade or so, he's been at the forefront of the AI tech world and leadership capacities, and includes a stint as the CEO of FactMata, which is just a really cool company that's at the forefront of AI fact checking. So Antony's someone who's been there, he's done that. He's been embedded in the AI world for a while, but he's also been an operator in the PR and comm space. So there's really no one better placed to talk about AI and its impact in the PR and comms world than Antony. So Antony, we're just really excited to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. And that's a very flattering intro.
I appreciate it. And what we'll do is we'll take some questions from the audience. We're going to keep this conversational, a little bit of a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box, or sorry, the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You'll see it right there at the bottom. And we'll get to as many questions as we can. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have Eleanor from our BuzzSumo team in the chat, manning the chat as well. And we're going to record this call and make sure we send out a recording shortly. Now, before I jump in and start talking to Antony, I do want to spend a quick second and talk about BuzzSumo, who we are and what we do. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, BuzzSumo, we are your all-in-one PR and creative content solution. And our goal is to take this big, impactful data set, all the content that's out there on the web, all the journalists that are creating that content, how the audience is engaging with it, and take that big data, but really narrow it down and make it approachable for everybody at small teams and large teams. Our goal is to save you time and help you do your job better, not add another task, another analysis task to your day. We're all busy, nobody needs that. So if you're manually scrolling across Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, trying to stay on top of what's happening in the world, our trending tool is going to solve that problem for you by making it really quick and easy and painless to do that. If you're manually sourcing mentions or using a tool like Google Alerts, we can make that better, faster, and easier with our monitoring tool. And there's just a whole lot more we can do in BuzzSumo. So if you haven't tried it, you can get a 30-day free trial. Just go to buzzsumo.com and give us a try. And I think you'll like what you see there. And you don't have to take our word for it. We're lucky enough to have been at it for a while. So we have a lot of great feedback. We put our G2 tags on the last page, but we like to hear from our friends in the marketing PR worlds as well. So a lot of these are just unsolicited feedback we got. So we always like seeing that. And again, give us a try if you haven't tried BuzzSumo before. So that being said, let me stop sharing my screen and let's jump into talking about AI and PR and comms. And Andy, a question I have for you to kick it off, based on all your experience and the fact that you've really been at this before a lot of us are even aware of what was developing in the AI world, when you go back 5-10 years and look at where we are now, what surprised you the most about the progress that's been made and how that progress has been made?
I think how long it took, actually. So you're right. I've been in AI, specifically AI startups, since kind of late 2013, early 2014. And back then I saw the power of them and the value of them. But there was a small group of us, right, who saw that potential and were working hard on it. And it was really hard to build AI back then, right? There wasn't as many people with the skill sets. The data sets weren't as openly available. The research wasn't there. The investment was really hard to get because the results were kind of variable. The automated infrastructure wasn't there. You had to build everything manually. It was really tough back then. But the value was there in certain areas. And yet every year we thought, this is going to be the year. This will be the year that everyone realizes and it's going to go mainstream and it's going to go viral and it'd be great. And that was 2014, 2015, 2016. So the thing that surprised me is actually how long it took. And I'm actually super happy and super grateful to OpenAI and ChatGPT for building a tool that was so easy to use, throwing it out to the public, and actually giving people that tangible value that was really easy to grasp, right? That's the key thing in virality, is you've got to get a lot of value and it's got to be super easy to get the value. And that's what drives it. I think also the fact that so many different types of people used it, that the journalists knew if they published a story on it, lots of people would be interested in it. I think that's one of the things that helped it. So how long it took, I think, is the most surprising thing. But for those of us who've been in it for a while, it's like, finally, it's not just us tech nerds who are excited about AI.
Yeah, I have to imagine you felt a lot of vindication. Your friends and family are probably sick of hearing about AI, like, and it's never going to happen. And then all of a sudden it turns around pretty quickly.
Yeah, the fact it's now mainstream and everyone is talking about it. Even my mum has heard of it. I'm not sure she's actually used ChatGPT, but the fact that everyone has heard of it is something. So we're now on that growth curve. I think, like, if you look back over the last 10 years, that steady growth of the use and the application of AI, because generative AI, right, it's been around for a few years now, largely in the social media marketing space. And it was starting to kind of go upwards. And now with the investment and OpenAI, it's just gone through the roof. So I think the one thing we can learn about that last 10-year period is we know nothing about the actual pace that this will now impact us based on the last 10 years, because of all those problems we solved in those 10 years, but all those problems are now solved. So I think the exciting thing, right, is that the pace of the adoption and the creation of AI now is going to be that hockey stick curve. We're on that upward trajectory now. So forget the last 10 years. If you think that the next 10 years are going to be like them in terms of the curve, no, this is going to explode. It is exploding and will continue to explode. It's not going away.
Yeah, I think a really interesting kind of nugget that's built very like in there, and this thing I've thought about a lot is that where we are now is we have this amazing technology. In a lot of cases, we're looking at how we can apply it, and people are very creatively coming up with new ways to apply it to their roles and their jobs. And for people listening to this call that are in the PR and comms world, and you can separate it out, but both small operators, people that work at large companies, how do you suggest, if they haven't really been using AI, they're interested and they've heard about it, how do you suggest they dip their toes in the water? What do you see as like the most immediate opportunity for people?
Got it. Well, the first thing, if they haven't played with it at all, is to explain that ChatGPT or the large language models upon which ChatGPT is based are good at generating text. And for PR and communications professionals, text is still a large part of what we do. Thinking about it, writing it, editing it, distributing it, that's a huge part of what we do, because text is still one of the best ways for getting across information, right? Especially really specific information. And it engages the imagination in a way that sometimes video or image doesn't. But even with video and image, you've often got words, and words need script, and script is text. Images need captions, which is text. So you can't get away from the fact that text is a huge part of what we do. And ChatGPT, a large language model, is capable of producing text in seconds to a pretty decent amount of quality. And it is a pretty decent expert in basically everything. So if you're generating text and you're an expert in your field, you can generate text pretty quickly, but I bet you cannot produce it as quickly as ChatGPT can. And if you want to switch topics to something you don't know about, you've got to go and research, spend some time, get up to speed. It already knows that topic. So I think the immediate benefit for anyone in PR and comms is its ability to create text. If you're using that for a press release, if you're using that for social media copy, if you're using that for even internal communications, any form of communications, it has an understanding of the concepts and the principles of PR and communications, which you can leverage to produce text if you prompt it correctly. And I think that's the tricky learning curve a lot of people are getting into, is you can go in and give it a fairly simple prompt and get some okay output. But the experience comes from learning how to prompt it effectively and how to iterate those prompts. And that's where the learning curve is for people. So you can dip in straight away and get some value, but that's where the value comes from, kind of experience, is learning how to better prompt and iterate the prompts over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Makes a lot of sense. I think I agree with you. And if you haven't tried it yet, just go to ChatGPT and start playing around with it, and you'll get better over time. There's so much you can do to apply it.
There's loads of free resources out there right now on how to use prompts, and just Googling that. There's YouTube videos on that. But don't forget, the most important thing, if you're just going to dip your toes into, is to give it that persona. Tell it, you are a PR and comms professional. Here's what I want you to do. Just giving it that context does help with the output.
That makes a lot of sense. Be bossy is what you're saying. Be pushy. Tell it exactly what you want.
Yeah, you don't even need to say please.
It'll forgive you. You don't need to be polite. So the thing I'm really curious about, so for those who aren't familiar with Thackmata, and correct me if I'm wrong at all, but it uses AI technology to look at fake news and fake stories and verify some content that's out there.
Sort of, yeah. So we were using an early iteration of the large language models. This was BERT, which was a kind of a Google release technology from some years ago. One of those things we released in that period, which helped accelerate. So we used a model which identified the sort of lexical similarities between fake news and anything we asked it to evaluate effectively. So we didn't say this is true and this is false. What we said was, this looks like it could be false based on the fact it looks similar to things we know to be false. So that's what we did. We had a kind of a fake news model that we released. And the other kind of approach we took is that I didn't want to use AI to build fact matter as a source of truth. I don't think any one company should own the truth of the internet because it's so subjective, right? The problems we've got with the internet with misinformation and disinformation aren't in the binary black and white kind of true false problems. It's all in the gray area and the subjectivity, which AI isn't great at. So we took an approach, which is, can we flag to a human what we think might be harmful content, including racism, sexism, toxicity, hate speech, as well as fake news, and then let a human make the decision. I think that is still the key for the application of most AI, is how do you elevate the human and then allow the human to prioritize their time, spend the time more effectively, but it is not necessarily about using AI to automate the task itself, right? It's about that symbiosis between the AI and the human.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that really drives at a core discussion around AI, which is it going to replace a lot of jobs? I think you made a really good counterpoint in there. That's that symbiosis. It's that adding to what you're currently doing, adding to your current abilities to help you do your job better and quicker. Is that how you see it developing more over the future?
Exactly, right. I think the one thing I say is there's a lot of fear out there about losing jobs, etc. And I would say no one who is working on AI gets up in the morning looking forward to putting people out of work. Right? That is not a reason to get out of bed. What we do get out of bed for is the fact that AI actually forces us to be more human. It forces us to do the tasks that only a human can do, right? The empathy, the relationship building, the emotional understanding, those are things AI isn't capable of. And that's what we want humans to spend more time doing. So we feel more human, more fulfilled and satisfied in our tasks, right? Organizing data, that is not a task that humans should be doing, right? So can we use AI to automate the parts of our roles that computers can do better? And in that way, free up more time for humans to do the things that humans should be doing. That's the approach that almost all of us working in AI are taking, and that's the direction we're heading in, is effectively elevating the human into that more strategic kind of emotional understanding, relationship-based roles. It's not about organizing data or producing basic copy. Like, I'm sure for all the social media marketers on the call here, when they get told, just give me some social media posts for this thing, and you've got to just bash out, right, some words, that doesn't take your real, true creative spirit. And it might even be destroying your spirit slightly a little bit each time you have to do it. Those are the kind of tasks we can automate. So you can think more about what are the actual needs of this post? What are the needs of my client? What are we actually trying to achieve? That's where I think humans play best.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Something I heard recently, curious if you have thoughts on it or not, it can just live as its own statement, is that there's also more noise being created out on the web and out in the world because of AI, because on the same flip side, it makes it easier for spammers. It makes it easier for people to publish fake news. And we need the AI will help make it less of a problem for the people in the social media world to deal with those posts by doing what Fact Meta did and giving suggestions, saying this might be this type of content. This is flag different types of content, flag whether it might be AI created or not. So it seems like we might be stuck in this eternal cat and mouse game. Do you see it potentially working out that way?
Yeah, 100%. I think it is a double-edged sword, right? And in that, it is a tool, and you can use it for good or for bad. The challenge stroke opportunity is the bad actors are already using it, right? So the good actors have no choice but to use it. So AI has, in some ways, made that problem worse, but it is also a really powerful solution. So I think the unfortunate situation is we have no choice now. We are in an AI world. You either get on board with that or the bad actors will win. So we are using AI to detect AI generated content, especially, we've already used it to detect misinformation and fake news. That just has to be part of how we live now, because, bad actors will be bad. So yeah, we are in that kind of cat and mouse game or a zero-sum game, but it's a similar game to, Twitter or YouTube have been this game for quite some time now, which is as they detect bots and as they detect kind of fake content used to just drive ad revenue, but isn't really, unique content. They invent some guardrails or some protections, and then the bad actors get around them and they come back. We are in that place now, I think. So it is unfortunate there's some bad outcomes, but I personally believe that the positives and the benefits to society, to us on a daily basis, far outweigh those risks and consequences, right? We've got people walking who couldn't walk previously because of AI. We've got increased ability to detect cancer faster than we ever did before. These are things that AI does that we sort of don't talk about that much because we're too busy talking about Terminator and HAL. So I think we need to focus a little bit more on the positives and drive towards those and talk about those, and maybe not get as concerned by those kind of scaremongering stories.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That ties into something someone was asked in the chat. Sharon asked, which is, I think we tabled on this a little bit, is there a way to tell AI versus human created content, but also that you're finding people, these bad actors that are out there that are going and saying, well, here's how you copy someone else's content by pasting it into AI. And it seems like the way we're moving, and correct me if I'm wrong, you probably have much better insights into this, is that the ethics of AI are being discussed a lot, very openly, and it seems like a pretty positive way. And it seems like that's where the industry is moving towards, is making sure there are guide rails around it. There'll always be bad actors, but
Yeah,
focus on the positives and make sure we're doing things ethically.
yeah. 2 points there. Firstly, I think there is a stigma around the kind of AI generated content. People in some ways are like ashamed to say that, oh, I use ChatGPT to create this, right? Or they try and hide that, or they're afraid of it being. 100%, we should be using tools like ChatGPT. It is a time save and it does produce good content, right? In the same way that we shouldn't be embarrassed about the fact we're using Zoom to talk to each other instead of everyone flying to the same location to hear me talk. So like, it's absolutely a positive and we should be using it as much as possible. What is bad about AI generated content is when people use it to pass themselves off as more of an expert than they are, right? That is the actual problem. So if we've got, like on Harrow, or we've got Connectively, we've got journalists posing questions, we've got SMEs coming back, where an SME responds using ChatGPT to generate a response, and that doesn't represent their actual original thought based on their own skills and experience, that's the problem. Not necessarily that someone has used ChatGPT to draft content which does represent their views and experiences, but they did it 10 times quicker than they would otherwise have done, and they wrote it slightly better if writing isn't particularly their strong suit. So I think we need to focus a little bit more on the plagiarism and the IP type risks, not necessarily the fact you've used a tool to write faster than you could previously. But that comes into the ethical and responsible use of AI. We absolutely do need to do that. And I think actually it's been really healthy, the conversations having about that, the commitment that Cision made just now, sorry, sales pitch, the commitment that Cision made just recently to adopting an ethical framework and encouraging the industry to do the same. That I think is really sound, and we're seeing that from all of the major players. I think that's the right thing to do, and it isn't just driven by the fact that we've seen a lot of fear mongering and scaremongering by journalists and clickbait headlines with Terminator heads. You've seen them, no doubt, in the last week, the silver head with the red eyes, right? It's not just because of that fear, it's because I think people have seen the effect that over burdening regulation has had on other industries, right? So there's still an element of not quite altruism here, but in the finance industry, right, they abused their power. We felt a global impact from that multiple times, and they've now been regulated to heck. And I think people developing AI don't want to end up in the same position, right? So taking that industry first, principled, self-regulating approach is also a means of self-defense, right? If we do manage to do that well, we don't necessarily need to have as burdensome a regulatory requirement as other industries have already had. So yes, we do need to do it. It is good, but it isn't necessarily altruistic. There are good reasons for why we want to focus on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A lot to think about bundled in there. A quick question from the audience. Why is AI unable to comprehend languages? Comes from Ryan. Unable to comprehend languages outside of English to a fluency level.
So this is based on the training data, right? It's gone out to the internet, and a large part of the internet is English-based. A large number of those data sets were English-based. So its fluency in English is going to be better than its fluency in languages that aren't well represented on the internet. So many of the other main languages, yes, absolutely. But if you've got languages that don't have the breadth of content that English does, the model will not be as good at translating and speaking those languages. So the availability of data is key here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot of interesting controversies with training data right now with the Reddit. If you guys want to go and follow the news with all the Reddit API changes, I think a lot of that, from what I heard, was driven by them being upset that it was such a great training data set for all these AI tools, and it's a website that's mostly in English, and they weren't compensated for.
Exactly, and this actually is driving, I think, will drive, this is a prediction, a change in the internet more fundamentally. So Reddit is one example of a publisher of lots of content on the internet. And they've realized that, yes, they're not getting fairly compensated for their data and how it's been used by people building large language models. I think Reddit is one example, but you will probably see the same approach from many of the other publishers on the internet. If you're on the internet and you're publishing a large amount of text, then I think we're going to see more stringent terms for accessing that text, more restrictions on how you use that text, and or kind of cutting off the scrapers, etc., and things like that. So more guerrilla tactics. So I think that's going to change the way the internet works. There'll be a lot less freely available content for us to use, because people have realized, hey, there's a lot of value in all this content.
Yeah, that's really interesting. More to come there, I think, right, as we see how that develops over the next couple of years. Lots of interesting fireworks going off already.
Yes.
And just right at the beginning of it. I guess kind of goes back to the earlier question, a little bit about ethics, a little bit about detection. So the couple of questions have come in around the ability to detect AI content. I know there's a lot of tools out there, and for anyone listening in, there's a cool article I actually found this morning in the New York Times testing out different image generation AI detection tools. The consensus being some, they're a little hit or miss. But another part of the conversation I think Nina asked about is there's conversation around like watermarking AI content. Maybe this applies more to the image side of it. Do you see it, and having search engines be able to build that detection in as well? Do you see that happening in the short term? Do you think there's momentum towards that?
Yeah, I think there is momentum towards it. I think the challenge will always be capability and the problem of false positives. So if you're in a situation where a false positive is okay, so if you're an internet search engine, it doesn't really matter if it gets it wrong because the consequences aren't severe. However, if someone is sitting their finals in university or college, right, that's a very serious circumstance for a false positive to occur, right? You're going to potentially kick someone out of school, or they fail their grades because you inaccurately decided that their content was AI generated. So I think it depends on the circumstance as to whether or not we'll see that rolled out more and more. But the challenge will be that cat and mouse game. So I think the challenge is we'll never have anything that is 100% capable of detecting that. And therefore, it will limit the ways and the kind of the types of use of AI generated content. But I think the momentum towards that is there, not least because we saw the impact of the Pentagon image, right? So the artificially generated image of the Pentagon on fire, which was a few weeks ago now, caused an actual dip in the markets. And I think whether the person that created that kind of content was aware that that was going to be the impact, or whether they're testing the water, having some fun, whether it was state driven. I actually haven't looked into that one. I haven't caught up on that one. Do want to get into the bottom of that. Doesn't really matter who created it. The point is it had the impact. And once everyone saw that it had that kind of impact in the markets, guaranteed you've now got people planning that kind of content and planning to short the market based on that kind of impact. So we've now got people exploiting it. So for that reason, with really serious consequences, guaranteed we'll have people working on the ability to detect that kind of content as fast as possible. Because if there's a large amount of money to be lost, there is therefore a large interest in protecting that money. Therefore, there'll be plenty of money to invest in that kind of technology.
It's really, really interesting. To pivot a little bit, so I'm seeing some questions filter in, and this ties back to something you mentioned earlier when we talked about kind of dipping your toe in the AI water. And your suggestion was just go for it, more or less, right? And don't be so fearful of it. And I think one of the things you mentioned, which we all feel a little bit, is pride, like, in a sense, right? Like I remember the first time I used ChatGPT to do something I might have done otherwise, like that's shockingly good. But there's also a little bit of the mechanical side of it, or people don't know how it's going to be treated. For example, LeVar asked, does Google penalize your blog's article ranking if it detects that AI is generated? If it's AI generated? I don't know if you know the direct answer to that, or you have a sense of where it's evolving, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on something like that.
Yeah, I haven't followed that one closely. My current awareness is that yes, it does, but I don't know how well they detect it, or how much lag there is between their ability to detect and the ability for you to use. Because you can use ChatGPT to create content, you can then use another AI tool to change that content to make sure it's kind of traceable back to the AI used to generate it, right? But then you've got generators who can figure out that AI. So if you want to try really hard to avoid it, you can, but I don't know what lag there is between kind of Google's ability to detect it and your ability to create that kind of content. So for specific cases like SEO and things like that, I think you do need to be more careful. You do need to research on it, and you do need to keep up to date. That's going to be changing very, very frequently. But in cases where, other than SEO and where Google might be penalizing you, absolutely go for it. I think the ethics and responsibility around this come in where people might expect those words to have been generated by a human, or relying on those words to be generated by a human. So for example, chatbots. So in the EU AI Act, the use of chatbots is where the words generated by a chatbot are generated by AI. We are probably going to need to start labeling that as, by the way, this chatbot isn't a human, in case you thought otherwise, right? We've been doing that for years. You've been engaged with chatbots not knowing that they are AI. We might need to start labeling that, because that's where we, in certain ways, you could be seeing that as like deceiving the human. So we're going to start seeing probably some label of generated content when it comes to chatbots and other use cases like that. SEO might penalize you, but for where there isn't an ethical or kind of responsible need to label something as generative AI, go for it, right? So there's some caveats, but otherwise go for it.
I think it ties back to something you mentioned before, which is if you're an expert on a topic, you can absolutely use, and you probably should be using, a tool like ChatGPT or an AI-based tool to prompt you, and maybe use that as a starting off point to create content. And don't just take something ChatGPT says verbatim and post it, right? I think there's a big gap between trying to pretend you're an expert in a topic you're not, and just relying on AI to do it, and using AI synergistically to help you do your job better.
100%. Even if you're an expert on a topic, right, and you're bored of even writing the same words on a different formats over and over, right, you can still use ChatGPT to create the content. You can even give it something you've written previously and say, can you rework this, but with this audience in mind, right? So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There shouldn't be anything wrong with that. Those are your words, and it's just reformatting them to focus them on a different audience and a different audience's interests. Its knowledge of those audiences may be better than your knowledge of those audiences, even though you may be an expert in the words. So there's many different ways as an expert you can still use ChatGPT. The way I use ChatGPT, if I'm writing anything, is acting as that kind of a bouncing off point for your ideas. So ChatGPT, because it's different to you, has different biases. It's not unbiased, it is definitely biased, but it has a different set of biases. So for just kind of challenging your own thoughts and assumptions, I think it's quite useful. The other thing is it's available 24/7 and it responds in seconds, right? You don't need to give it a call. You don't need to book a Zoom meeting. It's there at 11 o'clock at night when you have that stroke of inspiration and you just want to test something out. It's there and it'll be ready to answer your questions. And it gives you 100% kind of energy, regardless of the topic, right? If you're writing a sales pitch for the recently discovered cure for all cancers, it would give you the exact same level of effort to produce that copy as it would be if you're trying to describe the underside of a snail, right? It doesn't care. It gives 100% every time. So it's there for you. And I think that's, as an expert, is still useful to have that, just that bouncing off point, or just, review my writing for this audience. Well, hey, you might want to add this kind of comment, right? That's absolutely what we should be using ChatGPT for.
It makes a lot of sense. A question from Andrew. First of all, Andrew, I'll give you a shout out for absolutely killing it in the chat. So you're posting a lot of great content in there. For everyone else asking questions in the chat, we're going to try to get to some of those, but if you can, try to pop them in the Q&A box. I know they look similar. Makes it a bit easier for us to pull out the questions. But a question Andrew asked, first is a statement, which we appreciate. Cision's AI code of ethics is a great move. Awesome to hear that. Thank you. Double thumbs up. Do you think there should be a general AI code of ethics for the whole PR industry?
Yes. I don't know Andrew is, but I'll give him his £5 later. So I'm actually I'm about to be I think I'm breaking the news. I'm about to be named chair of the Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications Tech Hub. Bit of a mouthful, but Amex Tech Hub, and our kind of role when I take over that group is that's like the very first mission, is what is the responsible development and application of AI in PR and comms? What is that? And can we all agree what that is and then adhere to that? Because I think the concerns I've got with the US AI approach, the EU AI approach, less so the UK AI approach, is that where they take a broad and principled approach or a risk-based approach to AI, that means individual industries might get unfairly or kind of unhealthily kind of covered in that regulation. So for example, in the EU AI Act, there's mention of the use of emotion detection. And what they're thinking about is you using emotion detection in classrooms or in the workplace or at the airport, and they're trying to find different things, different levels of risk, different levels of interest. What we use emotion for is to look at news articles or content to determine, hey, what is the impact this has on our audience, right? We use it for a different purpose and a lot less risky purpose, but there is a risk. Within those regulations, we in the PR and comms industry get unfairly or just mishandled, right? And we get penalized, and we therefore lack or kind of lose capabilities we rely on because we are not represented in those conversations at the regulatory level. And Cision by itself isn't big enough to influence those conversations, but the entire PR and comms industry may well be, and it still isn't the biggest industry out there, right? But we only have one shot, and that is if we all join together. So 100% great shout, Andrew. I'm going to go ahead right ahead and do that. In fact, reach out to me, let's talk about it, and let's make that happen.
Nice. I will say Andrew's a great person to talk to. Been a friend of BuzzSumo for a while. So yeah, everybody, we broke some news on this call. Antony, you're now officially crowned, or soon to be crowned, the guy for AI ethics in the PR comm space. So I also saw a lot more questions coming in about that. So I think this is a really interesting one from Raquel, specifically in the PR industry. What do you see as the ethical line of disclosing to clients that you are using AI for generating content? And not that you're just publishing AI content, you're using it to draft, sort, edit data, using it as a jumping off point.
So different people might have different views on this, right? But my view, if you are working for me, my view is if you're not using ChatGPT, I don't want to talk to you because I know you're going to be slower and you're going to be more expensive than someone who is. And that maybe is a controversial opinion, but maybe it's because of my bias towards AI. But I would like to know that you're working in the most efficient manner possible. And if that makes you more efficient, please use it. I think the challenge to, and this is probably more on the agency side, I think the challenge is to that kind of time and materials model, which is, it takes you less time to produce some content in some circumstances, right? ChatGPT isn't great in every circumstance, but where it is, it's going to take you less time. Therefore, you're going to be making less revenue per project, per client. So I think this actually drives something in the agency space, which we've been looking to for a while, which is that kind of value-based pricing, right? Outcome-based pricing. Don't charge me based on the amount of time I spend on something, charge me based on the quality of the outcome you get from it. So I think in some ways it might drive us towards that direction. But I might have a different view to this than other people. Other people might want to say, no, I want to make sure that a human is 100% created all this kind of content.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I've said this a few times, that there's so much evolving. Like, it's curious to see how interesting to see how that evolves in the next couple of years. But I think, Antony, you've been ahead of the curve for so long. I think my guess is you're ahead of the curve now. In 5 years, like you go to hire an agency, you'd be like, and why did you not use ChatGPT to do this in half the time?
I can't even see the line anymore. The line is a dot to me, to quote a Joey line.
Yeah, especially for a company like, I'll say, for the BuzzSumo side, we're paying by the hour in a lot of cases. Like, I want you to use that hour as efficiently as possible. I don't care if it's handmade or not. And yeah, we're in the process
exactly. If you're spending an hour creating content right now, and you get to spend half an hour creating content and half an hour spending more time thinking about the strategy and making sure that that content answers the actual question, right? And that is still the role of humans, right? Because ChatGPT is as good as the prompt you give it, and it will always answer that prompt. But the value of a human in that relationship is looking beyond the prompt, right? Taking a brief from a client and going, that's what you're asking for, but that's not what you need, right? What you really need is this, right? That's a human component. And so I wouldn't worry so much about whether or not we're using ChatGPT to create the content. I'd worry more about how much time you're spending answering the actual problem, or helping me figure out what the problem really is. So I think, yeah, I would prefer someone to be using ChatGPT or tools like it. And let's not get hung up on the fact ChatGPT is good, but it's not the only AI generator out there.
Yeah, and please, everyone listening, treat that as a call to action. If you haven't, if you take away one thing from this call, if you haven't dipped your toe in the water and used an AI generative tool, which again, ChatGPT is one of many there, give it a shot. See how it can impact your workflows. Again, it doesn't have to be an entire workflow built in that tool. Just a little piece of a workflow can save you so much time and energy, can help you do your job faster and also help you do your job better.
Yeah, I think the first thing I learned actually from ChatGPT was, I think when I very first started using it, I was using it like Google. So I was writing in a question like a Google search, right? And some of the call may not remember that period, because I remember the advent of Google. I am old enough, where you're starting to learn how to ask a question in Google, and how Google has interpreted a question has changed over the years. But that isn't the way you should be talking to ChatGPT or tools like it. Treat it like a conversation. Treat it like you're actually talking to someone. If you want to know how to use ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT, right? Ask it, hey, I'm in PR and comms. How should I be using ChatGPT? Can you give me some example prompts, right? You can actually talk to it, touch wood, kind of like a human, right? Treat it like that intern, treat it like that that colleague who's just sat there waiting to help you out. Ask it the actual question you want answering, and it will give you that answer. And that's a mindset shift from the Google search, where you're expecting to have to do work on the back end of it to synthesize information and create the knowledge. It can just skip that part and give you the knowledge.
Yep. So no excuses, everybody. Jump in, give it a shot. A question from Oliver. He was wondering if we had any predictions for the next big AI hit within the PR and comms community. And his caveats, of course, image generation, text generation have jumped up to the forefront. But what do you see is coming next?
Interesting question. So generative AI, yes, for generating text. Also now for generating images and generating video. Generating video still isn't good enough, I think, for most use cases, but that will be getting there over the course of the next year. Generating images is already at a stage where you can use, if you're, to go back to the social media post issue, just get a social media post out for this, right? And you need an image to go along with it. You can use generative AI to do that. I want to come back to a point about protecting our creative colleagues, photographers, creators. Let's come back to that, because that's a really important point, and that's our role as communicators to protect those guys. But coming back to the question, generating text, generating images. I think the one thing that we haven't yet seen from so much from generative AI is the fact that it actually understands communications principles, and this is something we're heavily invested in and working on at Cision. Is you can ask a large language model a question and ask it to respond in the context of the communications in the principle of communication. So I was talking about change management. So John Kotter, right, has the 7 stages of change. I actually forgot the name of it now. I've studied this quite some time ago. But you can ask ChatGPT to respond with a plan which adheres to those principles, those 7 steps, right? 7 steps, that was the one. So the fact that large language models have an understanding of those concepts means you can use its reasoning power a lot more effectively than previous AI. So the real benefit of the large language models isn't to be a little bit better at the kind of AI we've done previously. The real value of those large language models is it actually adds a human to your team, right? If you can effectively engage with it. And the challenge we've got in this industry is working out how to integrate that level of reasoning into products that previously relied on the human to do all of the reasoning. That's the really interesting kind of stage we're all at right now. And that, I think, is where we're going to see real increases in productivity, stroke increases in anxiety from people who are like, oh, but that's my job. You've got to treat it in that kind of co-pilot manner, which is you don't need to do even now all of the thinking about your communications planning, your campaign planning, your crisis communications. He understands those principles. That, I think, is the super exciting thing that we're working on right now, and that will make the biggest next change.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And again, it's so hard for us to wrap our minds around it for those of us who are, I'm a bit more on the sidelines in the AI world, because 3 years ago, if you try to explain ChatGPT to me, I don't think I would have quite believed you. I've been like, yeah, sure.
No, not just you. All of us. We're the leap in capability we got from ChatGPT surprised even the experts. So don't be ashamed of that, right? Google was caught off guard by it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll take away my shame and just be amazed and in awe of it instead. You mentioned you want to circle back to protecting colleagues on photographers and videographers, and so.
Yes. So the benefit of generative AI, right? You can create an image in a few seconds, and it may or may not be just the image you want for that social media post. And as that capability grows, maybe we get to the point where 70–80% of the time you're looking for an image or a photo to go and so on, you could just generate it and use that. The challenge is, and this gets really important when it gets to video and other things, is if you're using generative AI for that 80%, then that's 80% less work those creatives are going to have, which means we will have 80% less creatives, right? There's less work to go around. There will be less of them doing that work for pay. So when you really do need that image to have that certain je ne sais quoi, which is still missing from generative AI, but a human can go, reading beyond the brief, understanding, using their experience and nuance, you're going to have less of them available and going to be a lot more expensive. So I think there's an aspect of responsibility that we have as communicators to sort of maintain that relationship and support for those creative industries that we rely upon and that rely upon us, to make sure that they're still around when we need them. So I think all of us would be less well off in a world where all we have is generative AI. Because remember, generative AI is generating images or text based on its understanding of what it's already seen, right? That true creativity is still lacking from AI and will be lacking from AI for quite some time. So I think that's something I wanted to make sure we got across, which is like it's a call to action for all of us, I think, to make that choice wisely. And if you can still get a human to do a job where you really want to, get that nuance, get that 100% target, then please do so, because otherwise we'll all pay the price.
Gotcha. And we'll take a couple more questions, and there's a lot of questions coming in. There's great questions coming in, which we can get to all of them. But one that popped up is there's been some questions fears around who owns AI generated content. Does OpenAI own the content you generate ChatGPT, or is that tool by tool based?
Tool by tool based. OpenAI doesn't own the content it creates. It writes off the licensing for that when it creates it. However, if you're using lock stock something that has been generated by an AI, the court case we had going through late last year in the US deemed content generated by AI, unless a human has made substantial changes to it, cannot be copyrighted. So you can use it to draft something, but you've got to make sure, and I forget the exact terminology. I'm sure Andrew or someone else in the chat will find that court case and reference it. The exact terminology of how much you need to change that content. But if you 100% just take something from a generative AI, you can't copyright it.
Gotcha. And I'm going to ask you the question now. I think it's the number one question on everyone's mind that's on this call. We have this amazing AI expert in-house here at Cision, now head of the AI ethics committee. What are we working on at Cision that people should be excited about?
So I've already mentioned some of the things we work on, which is taking it that step further, like using the reasoning abilities and such like. Generating press releases is an obvious one for us in our space. The challenge, I think the challenge stroke benefit of Cision is because of our breadth and size. When we release something, it has to work for all of our customers, right? We can't just smash a user interface on top of ChatGPT and go bang, press release generator, right? We've got to make sure it works for all of our customers, and that it's safe, and that it's responsible, and it produces good quality content. So we have a taller hurdle than some of our competitors to make sure that what we're doing works for all of our clients. But on the flip side, because of our breadth and scale, and also our age, like the oldest press release we've got on record was delivered on horseback, right? So we've got so much data, and that in this space is largely how you compete, is have you got access to a large amount of data? Is that data unique, and is it good quality? I mean, in our case, comparing us to ChatGPT, for example, ChatGPT has access to all the same press releases we do, more or less. It's got a whole bunch of press releases. What it doesn't know is which press releases worked well and which ones did not. And you need that in order to train a really good press release generator. And in the industry, we've got more than anyone else. So our press release generator, in given time to get it out there, I expect will be the best there is, because of the amount of data and the quality of the data we've got available. So that's where this gets really interesting for anyone creating AI, is basically asking the question, where does your data come from? How much have you got of it? What is the quality? Because that is going to have a kind of a linear relationship to the quality of the AI you create. So press release generator, obviously sentiment, I making the point, everyone's been using sentiment for over a decade. And we've all stretched it beyond belief and purpose, but it's all we've had, so we've used it. I think we've got a new model coming out later this year called Stance, which is like sentiment, like the next level of sentiment. So trying to understand sentiment in context. So not just looking objective at the words, asking the question, are these words positive, negative, neutral about a given topic, or about a brand, about a product? So that's coming out later this year. Summarization, conversational search. We've got some really cool features coming out later this year. The slight challenge we have in Cision, obviously, we've got a lot of different products out at the market. We've got a brand new product coming out in the UK in the next couple of weeks. And we're saving up all the good stuff for that new platform, because it's been built with AI in mind. The challenge we have, just given that amount of legacy, is trying to squeeze AI features into those old products wouldn't necessarily have given people a great experience. So we are sort of kind of leaving all the good stuff for those new platforms when they come out later this year.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, and obviously I'm very biased as well, is something you touched on earlier, is we're just like, what makes me excited about being part of Cision and being part of this and watching what's happening is that we're not just looking to throw a new skin on top of OpenAI and ChatGPT and say, okay, great, you can access OpenAI in here, and like, yeah, sure, we'll draft a press release for you. We're adding our own spin on it because we have that huge archive of data. And on the BuzzSumo side, we're doing the same thing. We're being very immensely thoughtful about what works best for our customers, right? How can we build this into your workflows and make it really usable for you? But also, like, what unique spin can we place on because of all this data we have? We have so much unique data. How can we use that to just make this immensely more powerful, immensely more helpful, and give you that little bit of insight on top of the ChatGPT that drives the results for it? So
Yeah.
more to come soon for sure, but we're all really excited about it. All right, thanks everyone for joining. There's so many questions. Like I mentioned before, I would love to get to every single one of them if possible. We try to get to as many as we can. I think we hit a good amount. I feel good about what we're able to do. And if you've enjoyed this call, just know we hold these webinars every month. I'm going to share my screen again and just give you a quick update on the next webinar we're going to host, which is coming in July. So in July, we're going to talk about with Dominica and Beth about how to think global and act local, how to best earn links with digital PR, specifically about the US and UK, but it's going to apply. So talk about how to work those local networks to get global links. So if you're in the PR and communications world, I'm sure you're going to love this call. Beth and Dominique are people that just know a ton about this. You're going to be hearing from some great experts. So please make sure you can join. And like I said before, thank you so much for joining today. It's been, Anthony, thank you for joining. It's been so great to hear from you. That I learned a lot in this call.
No worries. And I've just realized who Andrew Smith is. I actually know Andrew Smith. So thank you, Andrew. And I do want to help give him a plug for his Chartered Institute of Public Relations AI content. Check that out. Really good stuff.
Awesome. Well, great to see all of you. Enjoy the rest of your day.